My name's Graham Morgan. I've got a small company over in the far side of the hills in Cottonmouth called Spatial Consultants. I'm also the chairman of the northern group of the Association of Geographic Information. Actually, Mike serves on our committee as our communications officer. The AGI is the professional interest group, if you like, for the GI community across the UK and represents the interests of all those involved in GI. Also serve on the management team of the Energy Coast Business Cluster in my spare time, but it wasn't always that way. Before setting up the company 3 years ago, I spent the last 20 years working on GI projects around the world. So I've had the fortune to work with all sorts of organisations and solve, or work on at least, all sorts of problems which we've tried to solve using GI technologies and tools. So I'm going to rattle on as quick as I can. Just and all you need to know about GIS from my point of view is three things really. First one is that everything is geospatial. Everything I can think of is geospatial. It's kind of an interesting concept, isn't it? Because if everything is geospatial, if everything has that in common, then everything can be related by the basis of location. That's a very powerful concept, that everything can be related to everything else. It means that not just can we draw everything on a map, which is very nice, but it means that the analysis that we can do with that information is that much richer because it's informed by that many more variables. And of course we can draw it on a map, which means we can view it in a more intuitive way than we could do just a table of numbers. People tend to interact with maps in a very intuitive sense. So if, for example, you take a table of data, if you work with every day, I soon get very tired and have had enough. But if I draw a map of that data, I find that much more engaging. And in fact, most people will find that your eyes will start to wander over that picture and start to pick out patterns intuitively and naturally. So there's a lot more coming through the pictorial representation than is coming through the data. So not just can we do richer analyses with data, but we can communicate that and make that analysis and those results understood in a much more intuitive and easily accepted way. So I think that's about all you need to know about GIS for now. How does it create and protect wealth? Well, sad to say it doesn't do. GIS does not do that at all. What it does do is it is really good at the integration of data because it can be integrated on the basis of location. So all this data can now be integrated in a way that a traditional relational database cannot do because until very recent times at least, databases did not understand the attribute of location, so it was unable to relate information in that way. As I mentioned, we can do all sorts of more informed analysis now, so we consider all these different factors and we can visualize it. So that's what GIS does. What is the value of that? Well, I'll give you some examples. Evidence-based decision making. What do I mean by that? We had an example where I was working in Australia just before the Olympic Games came to Sydney, and the Navy had a whole bunch of bombs in Sydney, and it was seen to be a bad thing with the Olympic Games coming, so they wanted to get the bombs out before all the tourists arrived. And they chose a lovely site, a beautiful site called Jarvis Bay, but it was too nice, and everyone said you can't put it there. So now all of a sudden they had to find another place to put their armaments, and the Olympic Games weren't going to wait for them. So the use of GIS in this case was as a way to add transparency to the environmental assessment process. So people could put their data out in a way that others could look at it and see what was being considered. So that they felt that their point of view was being put across and they could see what others were bringing and possibly objecting to. So it supported this a transparent process. As you mentioned, spatial analysis, so not just understanding where something is, but understanding where something is in relation to other things. Is it adjacent to something? Is it contained within something? Is it connected to something? Understanding those spatial relationships enables us to do much more in-depth analysis of a situation, so bring greater insight to any particular problem that we're taking a look at. What that usually leads to is targeting of some sort. So targeting of opportunities or targeting of risks. So an opportunity might be, well, where's the best place to drill for oil? Where's the best place to site a new store? Or site a new telecommunications mast? Where's the best place to site a new school or ambulance, all sorts of things that by bringing lots of different factors into account, not just what's there now, but looking at other phenomena, things that may not be physical. So we say, yeah, everything can be mapped, but not everything is physical. A phenomena such as incidents of rainfall or sunshine is not a physical thing, but these things can all be mapped. A phenomenon such as social deprivation, teenage pregnancy is not a physical thing, but we can map those, and they may provide insight into a decision-making process. Likewise, risks such as the risk of a valuable landscape being degraded or endangered species be put further at risk, or the risk of a facility failing in the middle of the countryside and putting a large part of the population out in the dark, or the risk of flooding in my hometown of Cockermouth. These are all things, again, that can be mapped and presented as results. Another type of thing that we'd look at is, if we're making a decision, what would the impact of that decision be? So, for example, if I was going to traffic calm a particular street, what might the impact be on the traffic network in the surrounding area? Again, these are all things that we can run, as Laura referred to earlier, these what if scenarios to understand what a decision might mean. But thereby lies the value, I think. The value is purely in better informed decisions. So you can't create wealth or protect wealth if you're making bad decisions. And this is where the GIS brings about. But GIS has always done that. That's nothing new. But there are a lot of things that are happening now that I think are new. So I put this slide up. This comes from the AGI Foresight study. The AGI recently has completed a study where we've looked 5 years forward to say, what do we think our world might look like in 5 years' time? And I've put up a whole pile of websites there, which I think are interesting, purely because they weren't there 5 years ago. So if you want to think of what does 5 years mean, 5 years is not a long time, is it? 5 years is a long time sometimes. And right now, 5 years is a long time. So websites that are used commonly as part of everyone's daily going about their lives weren't there 5 years ago. Well, okay, I kind of mislead you, because OpenStreetMap, Facebook, and Firefox had just appeared on the horizon 5 years ago, but the rest hadn't. Yet now they're used every day. So the way that we interact with the world and the way we interact with each other, and the number of people participating in that interaction, has grown phenomenally in the last 5 years. And we're also broke right now as a nation, so a lot of things are all coming together, including some of these things. So I want to talk about, and it will be very quickly now, geography is an information context. I'll explain what I mean by that shortly. Consumer web mapping, suddenly there are a whole pile of people that are using GIS, even though they may not realise that they're using GIS. They reckon that every month now there's 100 million web maps viewed, and yet hardly any of those come from the traditional GIS vendors. They all come from newcomers. It's almost like someone from Mars has landed and taken over. No one saw it coming. But suddenly most people interacting with GIS are doing it through newcomers to the game. Smartphones that understand where they are becoming very prevalent. And in fact, by I forget my numbers now, but 2015 is it? I think that almost all phones that you get will be location enabled, either directly through GPS or just indirectly through understanding where they are with relation to Wi-Fi networks. Believe it or not, those Google vans that drove the countryside and took all those photographs, they weren't just doing that. Rumour has it they were also listening for Wi-Fi networks, and they've mapped all the Wi-Fi networks in the country. So as people connect, even if they don't have a GPS available to them, Google has technologies that can figure out where you are if you're anywhere near a Wi-Fi network. So suddenly location is becoming available to people that provide services. Crowdsourcing is quite a new phenomenon. Crowdsourcing is the idea that you and me and everybody else can actually create data and provide it for others to use. Best example of that would be OpenStreetMap, where the whole world, or much of the world, has been mapped by people with GPS receivers running around on their bicycles, mapping what they saw, or tracing off aerial photographs that have been provided for free by people like Yahoo. Those maps are becoming very detailed indeed. In fact, if you've got somewhere like Cambridge in the UK, the OpenStreetMap data is phenomenal. And not just is that data available as a picture on your screen, but the data behind it is also available to be downloaded and used for free. The UK government has recently joined the bandwagon this year with the open data policy. After hoarding data for years, the UK is now releasing data into the public domain so that you and I, anybody else, can work with that data and generate additional value from it. 2 years ago, we scoffed when people talked about cloud computing, but now we realise what it is. We realise that we all use it every day. Our Facebook account and Hotmail account, they're all cloud-based services. But more and more, other enterprise-type services are moving towards the cloud. So, for example, ESRI that we've talked about earlier, they are now providing cloud-based services. Oracle already have cloud-based services. Amazon, believe it or not, I'm amazed as one of the major cloud vendors. There we go. The world is changing very quickly. And not just that, open source software, there's some very good open source software around now, and the UK government is even endorsing the use of open source software, or at least recommending that open source be considered side by side with proprietary software in a tendering process. So there's a lot of changes going on now that affect our GIS world, but they also bring opportunities with them. Quickly go on. Geography as a context. A regular Google search for something like doctors, Google will bring back all of the websites that kind of have lots of links to them involving doctors, because they don't know what you're looking for. They can only bring back sites that are ranked highly according to that term. But if they know that you're looking for doctors in a particular area, either because you've gone to their Google Maps application to type doctors, or because you provided a postcode or a location identifier like a town name, then they can bring back results relevant to that geographical context. So if you type in hairdressers, you probably don't want to know what hairdressers in Tokyo are. If you're standing in Cockermouth Main Street, you want to know what are the hairdressers near me. So that context makes the information that's returned to you much more relevant and valuable to you. So the search engines could do that if I told them where I was. But I don't need to do that anymore. The latest version of Firefox, which you may have downloaded, uses, supports the latest HTML version, HTML5. HTML5 understands location. Not just that, Firefox reports your location by default now. So the search engines know where you are. They think that's a good thing, because it means that they can provide results that are relevant to where you are. Not a lot of people might know that. IE9, next version of Microsoft's browser, will also support HTML5 and will also be location enabled. It will be able to report where you are based upon the network that you're connected to. So that's kind of interesting for them, or it may be scary for us sometimes. This is probably very important for mobile phone users as well. If you're a mobile phone user, your mobile phone may be GPS enabled or able to locate you via a wireless network. So again, the information presented to you is presented to you in the context of your location, and that's seen as being a value add to your service. That's important to Google. Google are making money out of this because they think they're providing information that's more relevant to you, so you are likely to use their service rather than somebody else's, so they can charge more for their advertising.